Some people survive because they are strong, others survive because they are smart. But a rare few survive situations so brutal, so impossible, that their stories almost sound made up. Before we begin, subscribe for more unbelievable true survival stories. In this video, we are looking at 3 people who were pushed past every human limit and somehow refused to die. First, a teenage girl falls from the sky into the Amazon rainforest and has to find her way back to civilization alone. Then, a frontiersman is stripped naked and hunted across the American wilderness. And finally, a hiker trapped deep inside a canyon is forced to make an unthinkable choice to survive. These are not just stories about luck. They are stories about fear, instinct, pain, and what happens when the human mind reaches a point where survival becomes stronger than reason itself. Because every person in this video faced a moment where logic said they were already dead. On December 24th, 1971, 17-year-old Julianne Kupka boarded a plane in Lima with her mother. They were flying home for Christmas, heading toward the Amazon rainforest, where Julianne's father worked at a research station. The flight was supposed to be short, but the airline had a poor safety record. About 30 minutes after takeoff, the plane entered a violent thunderstorm. The cabin shook. Luggage fell from above. Passengers screamed as lightning flashed outside the windows. Then Julianne looked out. The wing was on fire. Moments later, the aircraft went into a nosedive. The force became so violent that the plane started tearing apart in midair. The cabin disappeared around Julianne, and suddenly, she was falling through the sky, still strapped to her seat. Below her was nothing but rainforest. Then she blacked out. When Julianne opened her eyes, it was the next morning. Somehow, the jungle canopy and the row of seats had broken her fall just enough to keep her alive. But she was badly injured. She had a concussion, a broken collarbone, a deep wound in her arm, an injured knee. She called for her mother. No one answered. Julianne searched the wreckage, but she found no survivors. Then she remembered something from growing up in the rainforest. If you are lost in the jungle, find water. A stream can lead to a river, and a river can lead to people. With only a small bag of candy for food, she began walking. For days, she pushed through the rainforest. At night, she slept on the ground, while insects crawled around her, and the sounds of animals echoed through the trees. Her arm wound became infected. Soon, maggots were living inside it. On the 4th day, she found a stream and followed it until it opened into a wider river. But by the 10th day, her strength was almost gone. Then she saw a small boat tied to the riverbank. Nearby was a hut. Inside, she found gasoline and remembered seeing her father use it to remove maggots from an animal's wound. So she poured it onto her own arm and pulled the maggots out one by one. The pain was unbearable, but she was still alive. The next morning, Julianne heard voices. When the men outside saw her, they were terrified at first. She was wounded, dirty, starving, and barely recognizable as human. But she spoke to them in Spanish and explained what had happened. They treated her wounds, gave her food, and brought her back to civilization. Julianne was the only survivor of the crash. Her mother was later found in the jungle. She had survived the fall too, but was too badly injured to move and died before help could reach her. Out of 92 people on board, only Julianne made it out alive. In 1809, frontiersman John Coulter was paddling up the Jefferson River with his friend John Potts. The 2 men were hunting for beaver pelts, but they had entered dangerous territory. This was Blackfeet land, and American fur trappers were not welcome there. Coulter knew that better than most. He had traveled through the region before with the Lewis and Clark expedition, and he understood that one wrong move could get them killed. As their canoe moved quietly along the river, dozens of Blackfeet warriors suddenly stepped out from the trees. Then more appeared. Within moments, Coulter and Potts were surrounded. The warriors ordered them to come ashore. Coulter knew they had no real choice. He guided the canoe to the bank, and the second he stepped onto land, they stripped him of everything: his rifle, his knife, his clothes, and all his gear. But Potts refused to leave the canoe. One of the warriors shot him with an arrow. Bleeding and panicking, Potts grabbed his rifle and fired back, killing one of them. Seconds later, arrows flew from every direction, and Potts was killed in front of Coulter. Coulter stood there naked, unarmed, and certain he would be next. But instead, the leader pointed toward the open prairie and told him to run. At first, Coulter may have thought they were letting him go. Then he heard the war cries behind him. This was not mercy, it was a hunt. Coulter sprinted across the prairie, bare feet slamming into sharp rocks, branches tearing at his legs. Miles away was the Madison River. If he could reach it, he might survive. But the warriors were closing in. His vision blurred. Blood poured from his nose. His body was failing. Then he looked back and saw one warrior only a short distance behind him. Coulter knew he could not outrun him, so he stopped, turned, and raised his arms. The warrior, charging at full speed, was startled. He stumbled, fell, and snapped his spear. Coulter rushed forward, grabbed the broken weapon, and drove it into him. Then he took the man's blanket and ran. By the time Coulter reached the river, he was bleeding and barely able to stand. He plunged into the icy water and hid beneath a beaver lodge, where he found a tiny pocket of air. Moments later, the warriors arrived. They searched the riverbank for hours, walking only feet away from where he was hiding. Coulter stayed frozen in the water, afraid that even one breath would give him away. Finally, night fell. The voices faded, and John Coulter slipped back into the river, half frozen, wounded, and somehow still alive. He would spend the next 11 days crossing hundreds of miles of wilderness with nothing but a stolen blanket, surviving on roots and berries until he finally reached a trading fort. He was thin, bleeding, and almost unrecognizable, but he had survived. In April 2003, Aaron Ralston was hiking alone through Blue John Canyon in Utah. He was experienced, confident, and used to being in the wilderness. But he had made one dangerous mistake. He had not told anyone exactly where he was going. As Aaron climbed through a narrow slot canyon, a heavy boulder suddenly shifted. Before he could react, it slammed down and pinned his right arm against the canyon wall. He tried to pull free. Nothing moved. He was trapped. At first, Aaron believed he could escape. He pushed against the rock. He chipped at it with a small multi-tool. He tried using ropes and leverage, but the boulder would not move. Hours turned into days. His food ran out. His water disappeared. The canyon was silent and no one was coming because no one knew where to look. By the 5th day, Aaron understood something terrifying. Nature had stopped giving him choices. There was only one left, so he made the only decision left. To survive, he would have to cut off his own arm. Using the dull blade of his multi-tool, Aaron began cutting into his trapped arm. The pain was almost beyond imagination, but the blade was too weak to cut through bone, so Aaron did something even more horrifying. He broke the bones in his own arm. Then he kept cutting. After freeing himself, Aaron still had to escape the canyon. Weak, bleeding, and severely dehydrated, he climbed down, stumbled through the desert, and kept moving until he finally found help. He had been trapped for more than 5 days, but he survived because, at the moment where most people would have given up, Aaron chose the impossible. He left part of himself behind and walked out alive. Julian Kupska woke up alone in the Amazon surrounded by jungle. John Coulter ran through open wilderness with death only steps behind him. Aaron Ralston stood trapped in silence with time slowly running out. Their situations could not have been more different, but every one of them eventually reached the same moment, the point where fear no longer mattered. Because survival is strange. It does not always belong to the strongest person in the room. Sometimes it belongs to the one who simply refuses to stop moving. And maybe that is why stories like these stay with us. Not because they remind us how close people came to dying, but because they remind us how far people can go to stay alive.